Welcome to VGG Music Sci-Fi.
Hi, this is James from Wheel. We've just released our latest album, Resident Human, and I'm here talking to BGP Live.
Thanks. What are the positive aspects of the year 2020?
Say that again, please.
What are your positive aspects of 2020?
I think that's a good question. There's been a lot of negativity, of course, with how much the world's changed, but I think the positive has been it's just broken up a pattern of behaviour, I think, for basically everybody, myself included, where we've just been going through the motions and, at least for myself, not really questioning the why of it, just getting through the day-to-day and trying to survive. And I think as we put in the lyrics of some of the songs on the latest album, trying to take a step back and reevaluate our relationship to the wider world and our place in it has been it's been quite useful. It's not been a pleasant experience, but coming out the other side of it, I think it's been a valuable one.
Okay, I see. Because we don't have the time in the usual world.
Yeah, exactly. I think we were so, especially after 2019, which was a really full-on year for Wheel. We were touring a lot. We did these long tours with Soen, who are great, by the way. You should check out their new album, Imperial, if you haven't heard it. And with Catatonia, who we really like. We had all these festival dates, and it was just go, go, go from the start to the finish ever since Moving Backwards came out. And we got so used to that way of thinking and to be making these really snap, quick decisions to adapt to what was happening around us that we weren't pleased about it when it happened, but we actually lost out quite dramatically. Like I think most bands, when the pandemic began, we were touring with Apocalyptica at that point here in Finland, and I was even singing with them at some of the shows. And the first night of this, we played a show together, and we found out everything else was going to be cancelled. So that when we had dates planned with Meshuggah and with Devin Townsend, that also got cancelled. And we were originally planning to produce the album over a much shorter period of time. And I'm really, really glad we didn't, because we've been able to invest far more into the overall themes of the album and just quality in general. And to be honest, we would have done that no matter what happened. I think we would have, even with the original timetable we were aiming for, we wouldn't have been satisfied with how far we got by the beginning of April. But either way, it was much simpler having this extra time to use in and really just be able to throw in everything we could into the record. And I think the result has been a much better album than we could have made otherwise.
Okay, I see. How is it in Finland with the COVID?
Up to the beginning of this year, I think Finland has had one of the best responses to COVID globally by a mile. Like the restrictions were very mild. Bars and restaurants have been open for most of it. There are a limited number of people who can go there, but and they had to shut early, like around 10 o'clock. But still, there haven't been that many times where they've had to shut. There have been a few, but we're talking weeks rather than months, like it's been in most countries. And in fact, the response was so good last summer, we were able to play 2 festival shows here in Finland, which was absolutely surreal, considering the state of the wider world. And I'm incredibly grateful that I live here. I think as of this year, it's changed a bit again, ever since the vaccine issue began. So the UK, which has frankly done a shit job of trying to manage the pandemic for most of last year, now they've got 100 million vaccines. So they're really set because of the deal they negotiated regarding the development of one of the vaccines. And the EU, as I'm sure you know, is pretty fucked and doesn't have nearly enough vaccines for the people living here. So, time will tell how this pans out. But it is just frustrating because I think, like everybody else, we can't wait for this to go back to normal. I haven't seen my family now for 14 months in the UK. And I really just want to get over there and see people. Like my niece, when she was born at the end of 2019, I've met her once when she was a few weeks old, and I've just missed all of it. And it's going to be really, really great to get back to just being able to travel without worrying so much.
Yeah, I see. We hope soon.
So, yeah, and it's the same for everyone. It's not just me. And I'm well aware that we are very, very privileged here in Finland. It's been a much easier time than it's been in many countries. I just can't wait for it to be done.
I see. What was the mood for this album?
I think we kind of ended up with this idea where we wanted to make something just about humanity in general, because I think we've seen such contrasting sides to it, especially over the past 12 months. The song Movement, our first single, was about the rhetoric after George Floyd was murdered by the police. And specifically, it was about this oversimplification, binary stratas of you either think there should be reform or you don't, which is unbelievably simplistic, considering we're talking about reforming a very convoluted, complicated justice system. And the amount of venom, false equivalence, anger, vitriol, all this other stuff that went into it, and the conflation, where it stops being about this man who lost his life at the hands of law enforcement in a country where presumably he paid tax, which paid the salaries of the people who killed him. I think frequently he was misrepresented, and it stopped being about this individual who died, and it became about this wider political thing. And I still think one of the smartest comments I've heard about police brutality in general, ignoring the George Floyd situation, which I think speaks for itself, would be that in a free society, surely the meaning of being in a free society is that you can be a deviant and a drug addict and still not expect to get killed by the police. And I think that's the case in point. Like, this should not be tolerated in Western society at all. And don't get me wrong, we have very different problems with racism here in Europe to what they have in America. But it was just interesting to observe, because I think it really showed how tribal we become as people when we're confronted with issues like this, and we see other people's behaviour, and you end up with this snowball effect where someone will say something that sounds like it makes sense, and we would use that as an excuse not to think it through for ourselves. And then much further down the line, you end up with this oversimplified and fairly unhelpful rhetoric surrounding trying to fix stuff. So that was kind of the dark side of the album. And then there was this other side of 2020, which was introspection and personal growth. I found this book over last summer called Hyperion Cantos by Dan Simmons. And it's a great story. I won't ruin any of that. I recommend it to anyone looking for some good old-fashioned escapism after the shitty year we've had. But I think some of the themes really spoke to me, particularly this idea of an indifferent universe, the idea that it might seem hostile from our perspective here on Earth. You know, when you leave our atmosphere, you're confronted with a vacuum and unbelievably cold temperatures. It all seems pretty scary and like it wants to kill us in a way. But the truth of the matter is, the most likely answer is it's indifferent to us. It doesn't care if we live or die. We have absolutely zero cosmic relevance as far as we know. And as frightening as that may seem, and I think some people would find that nihilistic, I think there's something liberating about that, because it might not care about us. That also means there's no expectation. And that means everything that we go through in our lives, every positive experience we have, every person who loves us, every choice that we make is absolutely loaded with significance and value. And I think the natural consequence of that line of thought is just gratitude for all that we have. And again, like, not trying to preach about it, like I think I've gone through this journey myself in the past year, just to be a bit more aware of my environment, my surroundings, and just how lucky I am to be here and get to do any of this. There was a similar revelation for Hyperion, the single we just released, which was talking about mortality, which was another theme in this Hyperion Cantos series. And I came to a very similar conclusion. All of us are on this linear experience between birth and death. And it's a train ride. None of us can control it. We can't stop time. We can't accelerate it. We can't determine how long this journey will last. But nonetheless, all of us, the thing that unites every person that is alive and who has ever lived is this existential truth to our existence, that there are limitations to how long we will be here for, and we all have to come to terms with the fact that eventually we won't be here anymore. And I thought a lot about that last year, just how I'd like to try and get better at remembering that everyone I interact with is going through this same journey, and sooner or later they will have to face the same existential fear and I guess quandary that I feel I've faced, where I've just had to come to terms with this. And again, like the previous song I mentioned, the solution is gratitude. None of this is a given. We don't know how long we get to be here for. Even this interview we're doing right now, we get to be here, we get to do this, and there's something pretty awesome about that.
Okay, I see. Can you tell me more about the process of creation for this album?
Absolutely. I had a few riffs and structural bits that I wrote over 2019 in the summer when I wasn't touring. And we got to the end of, I think it was end of November, I started kind of aggressively writing and putting stuff together. We were expecting quite a busy touring schedule for 2020. So we had this chunk of 3 or 4 months where we were at least mostly home. And I thought during that time, I want to write the bulk of the music, at least for the record. So from that point up to the beginning of February, I wrote all the instrumental parts for Dissipating, Ascend, Hyperion, Movements, and Resident Human. And I didn't have any vocals in mind at this point, but I had some pretty strong moods. I had an idea kind of about the kinds of concepts I might want to explore. And I was already thinking about this idea of humanity being an overarching theme. When we did a headline tour in February, which is the first one we've done, that was an amazing experience. But of course, I couldn't do much writing during that time because we were on the road and quite busy. So when I got back home, around then the pandemic began, and we realized we've got more time than we thought we did. So we might as well just delay a little bit and spend a bit more time getting this stuff together. During that time, I wrote Fugue. And when we were in the studio, finally tracking drums and bass, on the breaks when the guys weren't tracking, I was messing around on a piano and came up with Old Earth, the last track. And the vision for that one was it's kind of a return to Earth after this spacey journey that the rest of the songs take you on. And lyrically, that was by far the worst bit. I think I had a bit of a burnout at the beginning of the summer, where I think 2019 had been an incredibly stressful year, and the global situation was starting to get to me. And I just crashed. I was sleeping for 14 hours a day for weeks, and I just felt really uninspired. I couldn't find anything good to write. And that was around the time I found this book that I mentioned before, Hyperion Cantos. And when I read that, I started to get excited again about finding something cool to express in a new way. And it took a really long time. I think I spent about 5 months in total doing lyrics and vocals for the album. You'd think the music took longer, but it was relatively straightforward. We had some pretty good structures and arrangements done, but the vocals, they play a pretty crucial role in this kind of music, because we never want it to sound like complexity for complexity's sake. So I think the main role is to humanize it and to kind of streamline the wildness of the meters and the polyrhythms.
Okay. So you wrote the music first, and after you came a month later with the lyrics, like movement. You don't have the topic first.
No, I think there was a mood always. You know, I knew that I wanted movement to just be. I read a lot of world news, and I get very passionate about these subjects. So I knew I wanted it to just be something angry and just something to kind of push out all this bitterness and this frustration with a topic. But I didn't know what it should be, and I think it's almost like it wrote itself as we watched the situation unfold, because the amount of toxicity after George Floyd's murder, it stopped being about the murder completely, and it became this heavily politicized partisan issue, which seems to kind of overlook the fact that somebody had lost their life for no reason whatsoever. And you know, it continues now. The number of people who are just able to completely disconnect all the events that have happened since from this man was murdered. You know, there are family members who don't have that family member anymore because it's a complete failure of a justice system. And you end up with, even on the side of we should change things, you get these really stupid sweeping statements like defund the police. And I know there's nuance to that, and I know there are some good ideas in that. Things like better mental health care and having kind of outreach programs as well as aggressive law enforcement. But it's a terrible title, because anyone who disagrees with that view is going to look at the title and think, you've already lost me, I don't care what you say next. So I think this oversimplification is a problem we keep running into, and it doesn't actually help. There aren't simple answers and really black and white solutions for how to reform American justice or how to make the EU less bureaucratic, you know, whatever it might be. You know, these problems are complicated, and it kind of takes more than a soundbite to explain them. And clearly, as a population, we're not very good at listening to that information.
How do you compose with the band? You came first with the riff, and you go after for all the rest.
I do most of it in my studio, where I play guitar and bass when I'm writing, and I compose MIDI drums on a keyboard. Then I'll send it off to the band members, and they develop it from there. It's like long term, Santeri, the drummer who's been playing since the start of the band, we really want to do something more collaborative. It's just we're always racing against time. And to be completely honest, we had these songs which I've been making mainly by myself. Don't get me wrong, Ronnie Seppanen, our previous guitarist, wrote some lead guitar and played the solo over Hyperion. And Santeri has composed some of the beats and changed a lot of the beats I originally had for the tracks, but I've done the bulk of the structure and arranging at this point. And we don't really have a set way we do it. It's just been more, hey, we have a good body of work. This works as a complete narrative. Let's release it. And we're keeping open minds about how we approach that stuff in the future.
Okay. What was the recording process? The
process was we tracked drum and bass here in Helsinki in a studio called Finvox. Excuse me. That was just after the pandemic had begun. So our then guitarist was living in a different province. He wasn't even allowed to come to the studio. So we just went in, we socially distanced, we followed the regulations, and we focused on doing a good job with that stuff. There weren't enough inputs left in the recording desk to track the rhythm guitar at the same time. Although I did play along with the band, so we could kind of make it feel more like us playing together. And it was during this process we kind of realized that the main difference between Resident Human and Moving Backwards is just the humanity we want to present as part of the recording. So rather than going for this polished, clean sound, which I think really fits the material on Moving Backwards, we decided we wanted to go for something a bit rougher around the edges and a bit more raw feeling. And I guess, for lack of a better word, something a bit more honest. So after that, I was tracking guitar here in my studio. A lot of it I did just into a DI box, and later we reamped it in the studio. Some of the parts I played in the studio, because some parts, if you're just playing a riff, it doesn't really matter. You can DI it, and what that means in layman's terms is I play my guitar, it's converted, goes into a computer. When you want to reamp it, that signal is sent out of a computer, it's converted back into a guitar signal, into an amplifier, and then you mic up the amplifier so you can capture the sound of that amp. So it's just a way I could do it without having to be in a studio surrounded by people during the pandemic. And I think the result's pretty good. The guitars sound pretty awesome on the album, so that kind of works. And the vocals, I tracked most of that myself at a studio here in Espoo, where I live. And it was a very, very slow process. It took months to get all the vocals done, mainly because I was writing while I was recording. But again, I mean, I think the result sounds pretty decent. So considering it wasn't an easy album to make, but I think the good art is worth suffering for. And to quote someone smarter than me, it's not good when it's done when it's good. And I'm really glad we spent the extra time making it get there.
I see. I thought the mix and the master are very warm with the drums, the guitar. Very natural, very warm.
Yeah, I think so too. We originally I think there's a lot of contention around how to produce drums in modern rock and metal music, and you know, some bands do this really huge sounds where there's a technique called sampling, for example, or triggering, where, for example, every time a snare drum hits, you will get a recording of another snare drum, and you will set that sound to happen at the same time at a much quieter volume. Sometimes you do this with lots of snare drums. So every snare hit might be 4 different snares you're hearing at one time. And we've used this stuff before. Like I think in Vultures, we had some kind of triggering thing going on with the snare drums, for example. This album, I think we either use none or very, very few. Like there might be a couple of hits on the whole record where that's happening, but there's not much of it. We wanted it to sound more like just a basic band playing. I was thinking about recordings like Evil Empire by Rage Against the Machine, you know, and the drum kit in that album, it sounds huge, but it sounds like someone playing drums in a room. So we really thought that was more the style we want to go this time.
Okay. Lordi came last year or 2 years ago in Things Voice Studio, and the sound was warm too and natural.
I'm sorry, the line's not very good. Can you say that again, please?
Lordi was in Things Voice Studio back 1919 for a record too.
Yeah, I think a lot of good bands have recorded in Finvox. Actually, they're I think Amorphis have been there before. I think Nightwish have been there before. So it's quite a well-reputed studio. I know it's been there for a long time, and they've got this beautiful S&L desk that we were using. The live room just sounds amazing. We always think that, especially with drums, you know, that's the one part of a recording. There's not really a way to get around cheaply. Like you need a great player with an amazing kit, with great microphones in a great room, and then someone who really knows what they're doing has to connect all that shit to a desk to make sure it sounds really good. And every time I've heard people try and take shortcuts on this, the result's not good. Because I mean, there's a lot of very convincing trickery these days you can do with bass and guitars. And just to give a shout out to some plugins, I mean, when we play live, we always use amps. I'm endorsed by Victory, and I've got a really great thing going on with them. I love the gear they make. But when I'm writing, I use these 14 Neural DSP plugins, and especially the Nameless suite. I've been using that. Honestly, you could get very convincing results that I think would probably sound 85% as good as my amplifier when it's mic'd up. Again, just in my opinion, it's a contentious subject. But with drums, I think you lose something when it's sampled. I think that there's something just in the feel of the kit and the way somebody, our drummer, the exacts, it's not to a grid for a start. So there's this subtle movement in tempo, which I think creates space and also weight to some of the sections. I also think it's just in the dynamics, like the exact way he hits a cymbal. You can boil it down to there's, for example, with a tom, you can hit it in the center, you can hit it on the edge. But there are all these micro dynamics you can get in the exact way that a stick touches a skin on a drum. And I think that's a really hard thing to imitate with technology. And even if technology can imitate it, I think trying to recreate it, unless you're a very, very knowledgeable drummer, is very difficult.
Yeah, the drums were amazing.
Yeah, I'm pretty impressed too. I keep trying to write things that somebody can't play, but I haven't managed it yet.
So you do the drum and the bass in studio. Did you record the stuff live?
Yeah, at least that was the goal. I mean, we ended up overdubbing a lot of the bass afterwards because Aki was, he just thought, we were listening back through, and for anyone listening or reading this who's ever tried to record anything, it's like hearing your voice being played back to you. You just start thinking, yeah, I could say this one word a little bit better, or maybe I could make that point better. And we tried to leave it alone, but there were always little edits we wanted to make. So we did end up doing some overdubs with the bass as well. But I mean, I think the main thing is that when the drums were being played, we were playing stuff together. Like even with the guitar, we ran out of inputs on this desk. So I was just playing through a plugin, which the guys could hear in the room because we planned I was going to do the guitars later anyway. And just to get the feel of where the beat lies when we play together, because there are parts where the drums follow me, there are parts where we both follow the bass. It just depends on the song and where you're at. But we wanted to kind of have that communication, that interactivity between the players while the tracking was happening. So I guess we cheated a little bit because we did some overdubs and things, but I think the vibe is the same. It feels like a performance.
Yeah, I see the vibe in the first track, like Movement and Hyperion.
Yeah, especially Hyperion. We got to the first chorus in that song, and Santari, our drummer, just said on the talkback mic, because I was sat in the control room, and he said, just turn the click off. This doesn't feel right. We're forcing it. So we did just turn it off, and it was fucking scary, to be honest, because we were under this time pressure to get this stuff recorded quickly, and it was a big gamble to take. But he's a really awesome drummer, and he controlled a lot more where the tempo went in that song. So I think, for example, when it goes into the second chorus, when the key change happens, you can just feel it pulling back, and because it slows down, it just feels bigger and wider. Also, going into the guitar solo towards the end of the song, there's another big dip in tempo, which honestly, when we were recording it, I thought that this has to be too much. This has to be on the side of getting a bit tasteless. It's so wild, but I love it. I think it's just it almost resets your ears so you're ready for the next bit. And I think that's the real beauty of trying to keep your stuff sounding like it's played by people.
Yeah, it's like dance, you know.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
What are your influences?
We all like different. We all like different stuff, but I think there are some common threads. I mean, Tool are amazing, Carnival are amazing, Sugar are amazing, and then personally, I like a lot of classical music. I really enjoy Rachmaninoff and Chopin particularly. In fact, when I was a kid, my brother used to be a chorister at Westminster Abbey Choir School in London, and we used to go and visit him every weekend. And we did this wonderful choral music, which, of course, being an 11-year-old kid at the time, I didn't appreciate at all. But, you know, looking back, I mean, it was just absolutely beautiful hearing that stuff, regardless of the context. And I think so many of these young people were great classical musicians as well. So I was exposed at a young age to lots of classical music, which has definitely had an impact. Then in more contemporary stuff, I love Radiohead. I love Rage Against the Machine. I love Alice in Chains, Chris Cornell. There are so many, probably too many to mention. And even with prog, I feel like I'm really late to the game discovering some of these bands. Like last year, in fact, 2 years ago now, I finally started to get into Opeth and Catatonia. Like, I really love what those bands are doing. It's super inspiring. And yeah, I think especially because I'm writing prog and prog metal and I'm doing so much of it, I think I'm kind of keener to delve out of that these days and to listen to music from other genres, just because it keeps things interesting.
Yeah. And what do you listen these days?
I'm so sorry. Please ask that again.
What do you listen these days?
These days, lately, I've been listening to. I've been going through Pantera's back catalogue again. I realised that there was at least one album I've never listened to before. So, and I started going to the gym at the beginning of this year, and that's really great gym music. So that's been pretty awesome. And Mr. Bungle have done this new version of the Wrath of the Easter Bunny. I've got the name wrong, don't I? The Raging Wrath of the Easter Bunny, I think it's called. And that's a fucking great record, like a brilliant playing, so much energy. And it's a genre I've never really been particularly into, but I think that's what's been appealing about it. It's just something a bit different in the world of heavy music. So yeah, at the moment, those are my recommendations.
Okay. Can you tell me more about the clip of Movement? The visual.
Absolutely. So the song is about the rhetoric. It's about how faceless people on the internet use avatars and aliases to say terrible things to each other. So there's a degree of dehumanization happening. Firstly, it's from the writer. It's, I will say something more terrible to you because I can't see your face. This isn't a direct interaction. So what you're typing is worse. And also, I think the people sending those messages, they forget that the other ends, there is someone reading this who's also a person. And they're receiving this, and maybe it's more hurtful or more unpleasant than they realize it is. So the video kind of flips that whole thing around. It's a face, which is a very vulnerable, personal thing. It's absolutely human in every meaning of the sense, but they're being silent. It's almost like these masks and this range of emotions, which just like it can be reflected through comments, I think it's reflected in these facial expressions. And I think it's kind of a very artistically liberal way to articulate what the song's about.
Okay. And the cover of the album?
The cover of the album, that's easier to explain. So my wife, Annuka Lascelles, has made all of our album artwork so far. She's an amazing artist, and we figured because the album topics are a figurative deconstruction of humanity, we would make the cover a literal deconstruction of humanity. So it's pulling this head apart, and you can see what's inside. So it's human in the way, and it's revealing things rather than in a figurative sense, in a literal sense, because you can see the bones and everything that's going on inside the head. So it started off from that idea. Then I think also it was inspired kind of by old Victorian style. But you know, when you go to a natural museum and you'll see insects and butterflies pinned to a board, and then it's got this quirky writing underneath it. We wanted to kind of capture that sort of vibe with the presentation. There's something kind of inhuman about the way that stuff's presented and a little bit cartoon, which we thought might be more interesting artistically than just going for, you know, hyper photo realism.
Okay, I see. The album will go out on the 26th of March. Where can we find that or have stuff like vinyl, LP, and others?
We are releasing the album on CD and on vinyl at the moment. Those are the only plans. Additionally, it will be on all streaming platforms and all digital marketplaces. Like I think it will be on Amazon and Apple. But we've got global distribution anyway, so wherever in the world people are, they should be able to find a copy to buy. And yeah, we're just excited to hear what people think about it now, because we've been building up to the release for quite some time, and it's kind of close. So we're kind of anticipating it with, it's kind of the good kind of nervous, you know, like just before you go on stage kind of nervous. We're looking forward to hearing how people react.
Have you got a live stream project?
We're not going to do a live stream show. Currently on Instagram, we're doing weekly IG lives with other bands. We figured it's a good alternative to touring, and it's sparked some pretty interesting conversations so far. I think so far we've done them with Apocalyptica, with Vola, this Dutch brand, and with Stella Darling, who are Swiss. And we have some really interesting ones planned over the next few weeks. So anyone who's looking for content during the ongoing pandemic, check that out. It's been quite fun. Also, we have another project planned for this year, but we can't announce it yet because we're not 100% sure what the timetable is going to be or exactly how it's going to be delivered. But all I can say is it's something we've not tried before, and I think people will really enjoy it. So there's lots of exciting things happening in the future.
Okay. Have you got live plans for this year? Is COVID less?
At the moment, we know that a lot of the touring has been postponed. The tour we're doing with Apocalyptica and Epica has been postponed again to the beginning of next year. And I mean, at the moment, it looks like that's going to be doable in 2022. But, you know, at this point, who can say? Because I think 1 year ago, people would have said now touring is going to happen again. And we would love to get back out on the road. We really, really miss going out and meeting people and playing music around the world. But we also, we have a responsibility as artists and just citizens of Earth that we don't want to put anybody at risk, of course. So we'll get back out when it's safe to do so. For the rest of this year, I really don't know what's been announced. All I can say is that we've been booked for other things for the rest of the year, and because it's kind of out of our hands, like there's, for anyone who doesn't know, that there's us, then there's our management, and then from the management there are agencies, and then from the agencies there are local promoters that handle the gigs. So somewhere in that chain of commands, someone else has to do something before we can talk about it. And yeah, luckily for us, we've got great management, so I'm confident as soon as it's possible to do this again, we will.
Okay. I'll use the word for the end of the interview for the audience.
Yeah, I'd say that for those who don't know, my mother is French, and I've always been a very, very big fan of France. We used to travel there every summer when I was a kid, and I've got wonderful memories of the great culture, the amazing food. And just the great people. I love the passion and the kind of activism that you get in France. And the 2 times we played there in the past when we were touring with Soen were 2 of the most memorable gigs we've done. We will absolutely get over there to play some shows as soon as it's safe for us to do so. And to all of our French supporters, just thank you so, so much for caring. And yeah, follow us on social media and come and say hi.
Thanks for the interview.
Thank you very much for your time, Virgil. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care. Bye.